This was once the most powerful retailer in America, a company so large that entire shopping malls were built around it, a company that sold everything from power tools to family homes, a company that seemed too big to fail. Today, Sears is barely a memory. Its stores are gone, its empire has vanished, and one of the most recognizable names in American business has almost disappeared. So what happened? How did the company that helped shape modern shopping become one of the biggest corporate collapses in history? This is the story of Sears. I'm Ahmed, and this is the Money Archives. Long before Amazon could deliver almost anything to your doorstep, there was Sears. The company was founded in 1886 by Richard Sears, who started by selling watches through the mail. At a time when much of America was still rural, shopping wasn't as simple as driving to a store. For millions of families, especially those living in small towns and farming communities, buying everyday goods could be difficult, expensive, and sometimes impossible. Sears saw an opportunity. Instead of waiting for customers to come to them, they brought the store directly to the customer. By the early 1900s, the Sears catalog had become a fixture in American homes. Hundreds of pages thick, it offered an astonishing selection of products. Customers could order clothing, furniture, appliances, tools, bicycles, toys, and countless other items, all without leaving home. And the catalog wasn't just popular, it became essential. For many families, Sears provided access to products they simply couldn't find locally. In some rural communities, the catalog was read almost as often as the family Bible. But Sears wasn't satisfied with selling everyday products. The company wanted to sell everything. And remarkably, it almost did. Between 1908 and 1940, Sears even sold entire houses through the mail. Known today as Sears Kit Homes, these houses arrived by railroad in thousands of pieces, complete with lumber, doors, windows, roofing materials, and detailed instructions. Buyers simply assembled them on their own property. Imagine ordering a house from a catalog and having it delivered to your town. That's how far ahead of its time Sears really was. As America entered the 20th century, Sears became more than a retailer. It became a symbol of opportunity, convenience, and the growing power of consumer spending. Sears didn't just sell products, it helped build America's consumer economy. By the second half of the 20th century, Sears had evolved from a mail-order pioneer into something even bigger. It had become America's retailer. As suburban shopping malls spread across the country throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Sears was almost always there. The company served as an anchor tenant, drawing millions of shoppers through its doors every year. For many families, a trip to the mall wasn't complete without a stop at Sears. And once customers were inside, they could find almost anything they needed. A refrigerator for the kitchen, tools for a home project, tires, batteries, school clothes, lawnmowers, or a new washing machine. Sears wasn't just selling products, it was selling trust. Its in-house brands became household names across America. Kenmore appliances filled kitchens and laundry rooms. Craftsman tools became a staple in garages and workshops. Die-Hard batteries earned a reputation for reliability that competitors struggled to match. These weren't just products people bought, they were products people grew up with. By the 1970s, Sears had become the largest retailer in the United States, generating billions of dollars in revenue and serving tens of millions of customers every year. Few companies were more recognizable, and even fewer were more influential. The company's confidence was reflected in the skyline as well. In 1973, Sears completed construction of the Sears Tower in Chicago, the tallest building in the world at the time. Standing over 1,400 feet tall, it wasn't just an office building, it was a declaration, a symbol of a company so dominant that it seemed destined to remain on top forever. And for a while, that assumption seemed reasonable. Sears had everything a retailer could want: scale, brand recognition, loyal customers, and some of the strongest private label brands in the country. Most importantly, it had become woven into everyday American life. If you walked into a mall, chances are you walked into Sears. From the outside, the company looked unstoppable. But hidden beneath that success was a problem that would eventually bring the entire empire down. Because while Sears was busy enjoying its dominance, the retail world around it was beginning to change. By the early 1980s, Sears was on top of the retail world. The company had more customers than almost anyone else in America. Millions of families shopped at Sears every year, and management began to wonder if those same customers could be sold something more than appliances, tools, and clothing. What if Sears could become a one-stop shop for everything? Not just retail, but insurance, banking, investments, credit cards? Instead of doubling down on what had made the company successful, Sears began pursuing an ambitious new vision. The first major piece was Allstate, the insurance company Sears had founded decades earlier. Then came Dean Witter Reynolds, one of the largest brokerage firms in the country. Soon after, Sears launched Discover, a new credit card designed to compete with Visa and MasterCard. The goal was simple. A customer could buy a refrigerator at Sears, insure their car through Allstate, invest through Dean Witter, and pay for it all with a Discover card. On paper, it sounded brilliant. Executives believed they were creating the financial supermarket of the future. But there was one problem. Customers didn't see Sears that way. When people thought about Sears, they thought about tools, appliances, and department stores, not investments and financial services. As management focused on building this corporate empire, competitors focused on something much simpler: retail. Companies like Walmart and Home Depot were investing in their stores, improving operations, and finding ways to serve customers more efficiently. Sears, meanwhile, was spreading its attention across completely different industries. The company wasn't failing yet. In fact, many of these businesses were performing well on their own. But the foundation of Sears had always been retail, and little by little, that foundation was beginning to crack. Instead of fixing retail, Sears tried to become a bank. It was the first major sign that the company was losing sight of what made it successful in the first place. While Sears was busy trying to reinvent itself, a new generation of competitors was reshaping retail. And unlike Sears, they had a much simpler strategy. They focused on doing one thing exceptionally well. Walmart relentlessly drove down prices. The company invested heavily in logistics, distribution networks, and inventory management, allowing it to offer products cheaper than almost anyone else. Customers who once relied on Sears increasingly found better deals elsewhere. At the same time, specialty retailers were attacking individual parts of Sears' business. Home Depot became the destination for home improvement. Best Buy focused on electronics. Target offered a cleaner, more modern shopping experience. The retail landscape was becoming more competitive every year, and Sears was slowly losing ground on all sides. But perhaps the biggest threat was one that many traditional retailers barely understood at the time: the internet. In 1994, Amazon was founded as an online bookstore. Most established retailers didn't see it as a serious threat. After all, Sears had spent more than a century selling products remotely through its famous catalog. If any company should have understood e-commerce, it was Sears. Yet, while Amazon invested aggressively in technology, logistics, and online shopping, Sears failed to capitalize on its own history. The company that had once revolutionized mail-order retail was surprisingly slow to embrace the digital future. By the early 2000s, the warning signs were becoming impossible to ignore. Sales were stagnating, stores were aging, customers were shopping elsewhere, and management still hadn't found a clear strategy to reverse the decline. Then, in 2005, Sears made a decision that many believed would restore its former glory. The company agreed to merge with Kmart in an $11 billion deal engineered by hedge fund manager Eddie Lampert. Supporters saw an opportunity to combine two iconic retailers and create a stronger competitor against Walmart, Target, and the growing threat of Amazon. Critics saw something very different. They saw two struggling retailers trying to solve their problems by joining together. The future of Sears would depend on which side was right. As it turned out, the critics were much closer to the truth, and the truth was much darker than people realize. At the center of the newly formed Sears Holdings was Eddie Lampert. Unlike most retail executives, Lampert didn't come from the retail world. He was a hedge fund manager and investor whose reputation had been built on finding undervalued companies and extracting value from their assets. To Wall Street, he was a financial genius. To Sears employees and many retail analysts, he was something else entirely. Lampert viewed Sears less as a retailer and more as a collection of assets. The company owned hundreds of valuable properties across America, controlled well-known brands like Craftsman, Kenmore, and Die Hard, and generated billions in revenue despite its declining performance. Instead of investing heavily in stores, improving the customer experience, or modernizing operations, Lampert focused on cutting costs. Store budgets were reduced, maintenance was deferred, staffing levels were cut. As competitors renovated locations and invested in technology, many Sears stores began to look frozen in time. Customers noticed. A trip to Sears increasingly felt like visiting a retailer that had already given up. Meanwhile, Lampert implemented an unusual strategy that forced different departments within Sears to compete against each other almost like separate companies. Rather than encouraging collaboration, the system often created internal rivalries and slowed decision-making. The results were predictable. Sales continued to fall, customers continued to leave, stores continued to deteriorate. Yet even as Sears weakened, Lampert and his investment funds remained in a position to benefit. Over the years, Sears sold valuable real estate, spun off assets, and separated some of its most valuable brands from the struggling retail business. Critics argued that while the stores were becoming weaker, valuable pieces of the company were being extracted and monetized. By the time Sears was running out of options, much of the value that had once made the company powerful was no longer sitting inside the retailer itself. To supporters, Lampert was trying to save a company facing impossible odds. To critics, he was managing Sears for its assets rather than its future. Either way, one fact was becoming impossible to ignore. The stores were getting worse, the customers were disappearing, and the company that had once defined American retail was entering a downward spiral that would soon become impossible to stop. By the early 2000s, Sears was no longer fighting to regain its dominance. It was fighting to survive. Years of declining sales and underinvestment had finally caught up with the company. Customers were leaving faster than Sears could replace them, and many stores had become shadows of what they once were. Walk into a Sears store during this period, and the contrast was impossible to ignore. Dim lighting, empty aisles, outdated displays, leaking ceilings in some locations. While competitors were investing billions into modern stores, websites, and customer experiences, Sears was struggling just to keep the lights on. And the numbers reflected it. Year after year, sales continued to decline. Losses piled up. Store traffic disappeared. The company began closing locations across the country in an attempt to cut costs and preserve cash. But closing stores created another problem. Fewer stores meant fewer customers. Fewer customers meant lower sales. Lower sales meant even more store closures. Sears had entered a vicious cycle. Then came the asset sales. In 2015, Sears spun off hundreds of its most valuable properties into a real estate company called Seritage Growth Properties. Many of the best locations were transferred out of Sears' control and leased back to the retailer. The move generated cash, but it also meant Sears no longer owned some of the real estate that had once been one of its greatest strengths. Then came Craftsman. For generations, Craftsman had been one of the most respected tool brands in America and one of Sears' crown jewels. In 2017, Sears sold the brand to Stanley Black & Decker for roughly $900 million. To many observers, it felt like watching a struggling family sell its most valuable possessions to pay the bills. The company wasn't growing anymore. It wasn't reinventing itself. It was selling pieces of itself to stay alive. By this point, the warning signs were everywhere. Employees feared for their jobs. Vendors worried about getting paid. Customers had lost confidence. And investors were beginning to wonder whether Sears had any path forward at all. The retailer that once sold America everything was running out of things left to sell. And after years of decline, the end was finally approaching. In October 2018, the inevitable finally happened. After years of declining sales, mounting losses, store closures, and asset sales, Sears filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. For a company that had once been the largest retailer in America, it was a stunning fall. At its peak, Sears operated thousands of stores, employed hundreds of thousands of people, and generated tens of billions of dollars in annual revenue. Now, it was fighting for survival. The bankruptcy process sparked a debate about what should happen next. Some believe the company should be liquidated entirely. Others still hope Sears could be saved. In the end, Eddie Lampert purchased many of the remaining assets through his hedge fund, keeping a small number of stores alive and preventing a complete shutdown. But the Sears that emerged was not the Sears that America remembered. Most stores were gone. Most employees were gone. Most customers had moved on. The company that once dominated American retail had been reduced to a handful of locations scattered across the country. And perhaps that's what makes the story of Sears so fascinating. This wasn't a company destroyed by a single bad decision. It wasn't one disastrous product launch. It wasn't one economic crisis. Sears died slowly. It spent decades losing focus while competitors moved faster. It ignored changes in consumer behavior. It failed to invest in its stores. And when the future of retail arrived, Sears was still trying to figure out the past. The irony is hard to ignore. Long before Amazon delivered products to millions of homes, Sears had already mastered the idea. For more than a century, Americans could browse a catalog, place an order, and have products delivered directly to their door. In many ways, Sears helped create the blueprint for modern e-commerce. But while Amazon built the future, Sears became trapped in its own success. And maybe that's the biggest lesson of all. No company is too big to fail. No brand is too iconic to disappear. And no amount of past success can protect a business that stops adapting. Sears didn't just sell products, it helped build America's consumer economy. Yet the company that once seemed unstoppable ultimately became a reminder that in business, standing still is often the same as moving backward. And perhaps the craziest part of all, if you ask younger generations about Sears today, many of them won't remember the largest retailer in America. They'll barely remember Sears at all. I'm Ahmed, and this is the Money Archives. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments, which company's rise and fall should we uncover next?